Greetings from the other side of the election, that is. Alrighty, let's talk a little bit about what happened on Tuesday. So I've done this for my two on-ground sections, so drawing upon that as kind of my template. A couple of things here. One is, right, a remarkable and decisive win by Donald Trump. He's won all 7 swing states. I think he won Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin by narrow margins, and he won the other 4 by solid margins, right? So that's highly remarkable. We talked about that, right? That the polling data suggested that he was probably a little bit ahead, the average of all the polls, which turned out to be the better number here, as it usually is, a little bit ahead in Arizona and Georgia, and 50-50 in the other 5. Right, so in that sense, the polls did a great job this time around. Okay, credit where credit is due. Every result in the swing states was within the margin of error. The national popular vote will be within the margin of error. Right, I think they had Harris winning the popular vote by about a point. Trump's going to win it by about a point. That's well within the plus or minus 3 points that polls can offer us. So, again, man, a lot of people give polling organizations shit. On this one, maybe give them a little credit. They need it. They feel beaten from the last few cycles. That's one thing to note here. What else to note? It looks like Republicans will certainly control the Senate. That was easy to predict. How many seats will they end up with? I think it's going to be 53. I think it'll be 53. I'm trying to remember if that Senate race is what, in Pennsylvania, is that what gets it to 53? I think so, but I'm not sure. I think there's a potential for 54, and that might hinge on the Pennsylvania race. I just can't quite remember. 53 or 54. They were predicted to be maybe 51 or 52, right? So they're pretty happy about that. They overperformed in the Senate races. And right here in Nevada, right, Jackie Rosen just declared the winner a few hours ago. It's now Thursday afternoon. So she slipped by, and I mean slipped by. Wow, so close, within a point. So Jackie Rosen survives a scare. Democrats in Nevada, like I predicted, they surrendered a number of seats in both the Senate and the Assembly, but they retained control of both chambers. But it does give Joe Lombardo, right, Governor Joe Lombardo, Republican, gives him an edge in that session coming up in March. He'll be able to veto things now, and no chance of that being overridden because Democrats don't have the votes, right? You need 2/3 in both chambers. But I'll tell you what, man, if you're a Democrat and you're not feeling too good about Tuesday's results, okay, Nevada's going to feel like a little bit of a bright spot for Democrats. Although, again, man, right, Rosen was predicted to win pretty comfortably, and she barely snuck by. Obviously, Trump won Nevada, albeit narrowly, but a win is a win. Clearly my predictions, right, were a little bit based on the most recent polling data, the last few days, which is you're taking a chance when you rely on just a handful of polls at the end. Right, because on the one hand, you might be self-selecting because you like those results, or you might be capturing something that's happening right at the end. Turns out those were not to be relied upon too heavily. The more reliable number, as it typically is, was the average of many polls over the last 2 weeks. The average of many polls over the last 2 weeks, they nailed it. Yes. So, Democrats, right, back to the old drawing board for them. They have work to do. It's their come to Jesus moment. I'll address that in a moment. So what else? Shelley Berkeley did win that mayoral race in the city of Las Vegas. She defeated Victoria Seaman, who's a MAGA warrior. Although I thought Seaman actually made it a race when I didn't think it was going to be. I think Democrats won 4 out of the 5 Clark County Commission seats. I think that's status quo. Let's see what else. All of the congressional incumbents in Nevada won. Jackie Rosen narrowly. The 4 representatives in the House by reasonably comfortable margins. So our House delegation is still 3 Democrats, 1 Republican. What else? I was looking at exit poll data. I think I'll post that for you guys on Canvas. Exit polls, right, are when you poll voters who voted and ask them who they voted for, what their top issues were, what their race is, what their income is, what their education is, all of that, right? Great demographic data for people like me, political scientists. Also important data for political strategists, both Republican and Democratic, right? I'm sure strategists on both sides have already been parsing that data, and they'll be looking at it a lot more carefully in the days, weeks, and months ahead as they prepare, wait for it, for the 2026 electoral cycle, when a lot of Senate and House races will be up for grabs. So you're right. Each party wants to stay ahead of the curve. What's happening out in America? How can we adjust to those changes? And how can we maximize our chances of winning? And how can we put together a winning coalition of different groups? Okay, so this is the deep dive into the data. A couple things stood out to me. One is number 1, I think the most important data point for both parties. Harris won the Latino vote narrowly. She only got 52% of the Latino vote. Wow. Right? Gross underperformance relative to 2016, Hillary Clinton, 2020, Joe Biden. That is probably the election right there. The Democrats underperforming with the Latino vote relative to previous cycles. Right? And we talked about that, didn't we? The Democratic Party is becoming a bit more white. Harris did overperform with white voters relative to the last 2 cycles. That's a trend that I think will continue, related to Democrats doing better with higher income and higher education people who tend to be disproportionately white. And then Republicans have to feel super good that they did so well in the Latino community. Look, they didn't win it, but they came shockingly close. That is a massive wake-up call for the Democratic Party, a massive come-to-Jesus moment for the Democratic Party, for those who had come to believe that demography was destiny, and that as we became more Latino over the years, we would become more democratic. Well, not necessarily. Not necessarily. Craig, that presupposes that Latinos vote heavily Democratic. They did not. Latino men voted in favor of Trump by 10 points. Let that sit for a moment. Latino men went for Trump by 10 points. Men in general went pretty heavily for Trump. So again, wake-up call for the Democratic Party. Now look, Latino women went heavily for Harris. Okay. And again, Latinos overall went somewhat for Harris. But these are all wake-up calls for the Democratic Party. And I'm sure Republicans in the years ahead are going to double down on that bet of attracting more Latino voters, right? To say that throws a monkey wrench in the Democratic Party's plans for the future understates the situation. Democrats, relative to the last 2 cycles, showed improvement in attracting high-income voters. They showed improvement in attracting high education voters. It's called the diploma divide, by the way. It's an emerging divide in our electorate. Those with higher levels of education are going increasingly Democratic. Those with lower levels of education are going increasingly Republican. That's something we should take note of. And it was Harris's underperformance against working class Americans of all races that really hurt her quite a bit. Right? So Democrats need to figure that out. Right? We talked about that. Right? The Republican Party is becoming more populist, and that's proving to be a very effective electoral strategy. Democrats, I think, didn't take that as seriously as they should have, and now they will. Look, here's my read on the overall results. Right? Trump registers modest wins in all 7 swing states, narrow wins really in 3 of them. Right? So Democrats shouldn't completely panic. You shift those races a few points and she wins. Easy to say, hard to do. But it means, right, this was not an electoral wipeout. I would call it a modest, consistent red wave. What we didn't get in 2022, a red wave, we kind of get here. It's on a modest scale, but it's on a scale up and down the ticket and across all 50 states. And in a closely divided nation, that can be decisive, and it was. So look, I don't want to underestimate the problems that the Democrats have going forward. They are substantial. But I don't think they need to trade in their car and get a new car. I think they need to take in their car and get it worked on in terms of major repairs. All right. And Republicans, right, will now double down on the bets that they made this time around to see if it works again in 2026. What else? So race. Among black men, Harris certainly won the black male vote, but not by the same margins as Democrats did in the last 2 cycles. So some erosion in support there among black men. Black women were the most consistent bloc in support of the Democratic Party, extremely high and consistent over the last few cycles, right? So black women at some level are part of the core now of the Democratic Party. Black men just seem to be a little bit more up for grabs, just because men in general, right, are moving towards the Republican Party. Women moving towards the Democratic Party. What else here? So education, race. In terms of issues, it seems like the dominant issue was the state of the economy. Now look, as a quasi-economist myself, I'm going to argue that our economy right now is killing it. But most people are going to call bullshit on that and say, you're out of your mind, Carlton. I'll say, well, look at the macroeconomic data. And they'll say, look at my situation, Carlton. Look at prices at the grocery store. Look at the cost of housing. No, I get it. Right? We did have high inflation a year and a half ago. And there's a hangover, right? Those prices are not going to come back down significantly overall. They're not. For that to happen, you would need deflation, sustained deflation. And for that, you need high unemployment and a recession. So we're not going to get that, I hope. So what we get is inflation hangover. And I know the pain is real for a lot of people. So there's a sense among most Americans, for sure, that the economy sucks. Unemployment right now is effectively 0. It's around 4%, and most economists think that you can't go any lower than that for a variety of technical reasons I don't want to go into here. That's essentially full employment. GDP growth is solid. Unemployment, again, very low. GDP, wage growth is outpacing inflation for the last year and a half. Although, if you look at sort of pre-inflation America, we were a little better off then than we are now, because inflation over that longer stretch has outpaced wage growth. Again, why so many people give a negative evaluation to the economy. But again, right, in the last 18 months, wage growth has outpaced inflation. So by those macro measures, our economy is killing it. We're doing better than all other comparable economies in the world today. And we came out of that pandemic with, our own inflation problems, like was true across the globe. But we've landed what's called a soft landing. It can be hard to go from high inflation to a solid economy with low inflation. What can frequently happen is the Federal Reserve gets it a little bit wrong. They squeeze the brakes too hard, and you go from high inflation and a roaring economy to low inflation and a recession and high unemployment. We've avoided the negatives of getting from high inflation to low inflation. Unemployment is very low, and we haven't had a recession, and we don't look to be having one at all. So by all of those economic measures, econometric measures, we're killing it. I think our economy is the envy of the world, as it should be, but the American people are not feeling that way. And in a democracy, right, that's what matters. So those who evaluated the economy as poor or fair overwhelmingly voted for Donald Trump. Those who felt it was good or excellent, people like me, voted for Harris. But that second group is a pretty small group. Most of us don't feel like the economy is good or excellent. So that's something for sure to think about here. What else? It looks like, that Senate seat in, did I say that already? That Senate seat in Nevada did go for Jackie Rosen. Yeah, we talked about that. The Senate will go Republican, solidly Republican, strongly Republican. I think the House will go Republican, but I'm not looking at individual House races. I'm just saying to myself, wow, Republicans had a couple seats edge before the election. Republicans had a great election. Why would they lose the House under those conditions? I don't think they will. But right now, we don't know because so many of those House seats are still being worked out in terms of results. I'd be very surprised if Republicans don't retain control of the House. All right, so we're looking at a scenario where Republicans will have the legendary trifecta of the presidency, the House, the Senate. Okay, they're going to be ready to wreck shop in the next 2 years at least. Right, because when you get a federal government controlled by one party, there are no significant checks and balances between Congress and the president. The worrisome thing, might be, well, that might lead to the abuse of power and sort of no guardrails. One party gets everything they want, and the more they can get, the more they want, and it can spin a little bit out of control. On the other hand, you can say, look, when one party controls the federal government, we can get things done. We will definitely get things done. We're looking at some really big changes sort of whipping across our political landscape in the next 2 years at least. Really big changes. Now look, what will those big changes bring? I don't know. We'll see, And we the people get to evaluate that again in 2026. But we definitely set the table, it looks like, unless Democrats pull it out and hold and win the House back. I don't think they will. But if they do, you'll see more checks and balances, and Trump's life will be a little bit harder. But I don't anticipate that happening. I think the Republicans are going to get their hopes and dreams. Now remember, there's the old Oscar Wilde nostrum, be careful what you wish for. You might get it. Republicans did get the overturning of Roe versus Wade. It was all that they wanted, and it turns out, that didn't work out so well for them. There's been tremendous backlash that's really ongoing that has hurt them quite a bit politically. And it's produced all sorts of unintended consequences. So that's going to be to be determined. The impact of these remarkable changes in the next 2 years at least. Does that kind of cover what I needed to cover? I feel kind of like it does, except, there's always more to say, except, looks like Trump is going to win the national popular vote. Now, if you look at the polls, the average of the polls, they had it at Harris by 1 point nationally. Looks like Trump's going to win by 1 point nationally. The polls nailed it, That's well within the plus or minus 3 points. Because remember, if they had Harris up by 1, that could mean Harris up by 4 or Trump up by 2. What do we get? Trump up by 1. For polling, that counts as a big win. All right. So that's what I have for y'all. I did my BBC thing out on the Las Vegas Strip. My God, it was cold and windy. We were outside. If I can get that clip pulled up, it's on my cell phone right now, but I'm not quite sure how to get it from my cell phone to my computer. So if I can get it up, I'll post it for you guys. It's really nothing earth-shaking. It's television. It's hit and run. It's about a 2-minute clip. I say the most boring things imaginable. Okay. So don't get your hopes up on that. It is television, and it's not a long format where you can be digressive like I am here. It's going to be hit and run, basic stuff. But hey, I had a global audience for 2 minutes, so I'm not going to complain too much about that. All right, thanks all. Take care.